Welcome into another edition of the Gator Spotlight Series here on the Sports Lab, ESPN 98.1 FM, 850 AM, WRUF. My name's Ethan Ibe, and today we are joined by a very special guest who needs no introduction, the voice of the Gators, Sean Kelley. Sean,
Hi,
it's great to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into this thing. This has been a very interesting football season for the Florida Gators. You know, started off pretty slow, but they have heated it up here. They've won their last 3 games, now gearing up for the bowl game. What has it been like for you to cover this team for the last 3 years, and specifically this year with a roller coaster of a season?
Well, it's been, when I took the job, it happened to coincide with the start of not just Billy Napier, but Todd Golden's runs as head coaches at UF. And so one of the benefits of the timing of it was to watch these 2 men build these programs, and in some cases from scratch. And in Napier's case, that is certainly, what he inherited. So to watch this progression now into his 3rd season, and then really get to know this roster over this past spring and summer, you form your own opinion. You try to handicap how games may go, and you're looking at it through this lens of, here's the toughest schedule in the country. How will this all play out? And I'm getting to the age now, finally, maybe that's a fool's errand, and everything that you think you know is probably not going to come to fruition in that case. But that's what makes the journey of it, or the being with the team and watching them go through it step by step, all the more interesting.
Yeah.
So if you go back to the summer, this is truly a Billy Napier group. And it was the most enjoyable group football-wise that I'd been around since arriving here in Gainesville. And the talent level had risen across the board, and I felt like there was more depth at some key spots. So I had a really good feeling about the season, and I thought Graham Mertz returning was a massive storyline for the team. So here it is. Graham Mertz is going to start, and this young phenom, the National Player of the Year in high school, DJ Lagway, is going to play with him, and one's going to mentor the other. And the season starts, and thud. All of us watched this, lackluster start to the season. You're 1-2, and now I'm sitting here questioning everything that I thought I knew about this football team, or even what I know about football, based on what I had or how I thought it might go. What I didn't know was that Miami would be a different Miami team. Texas A&M had truly taken a step under Mike Elko, and then you kind of wander into this bye week,
right.
and the seat for Napier is hot, and the fan base is restless, and restless is putting it kind, but then the whole thing starts to change. The trajectory starts to change, but the one thing that didn't was the character of the team itself. I kept waiting for signs of infighting in the locker room, or turning away from their head coach. All those things would be signs of an implosion, that truly maybe trouble was on the horizon.
Right.
It never showed itself. And so then I was more encouraged. Well, sure enough, they had this great first bye week of the season, and then seemingly the season takes this turn. And then from that point on, working just through the normal injuries, and then there was the Graham Mertz injury. Obviously, now the season's completely different from even the week before.
Right.
And to watch them go through now, and you mentioned they've won the 3 straight, they've won 4 of their last 6. I'd like to believe that probably the Georgia game's a different outcome if Lagway's not hurt in the second quarter. So you could be talking about an 8-win team at this point, which even with all the optimism I had back in August, I thought 8 wins would be probably the ceiling with the schedule that they had lined up. So now they're 7-5, right?
Yeah.
And the supreme confidence they gained with the 2 wins at home over ranked teams, and then to finish the race, as Napier said, this past weekend against Florida State. So I'm really proud of the group, and there's great stories, right? We're storytellers, Ethan. This is really at the heart of what we do. The Montrell Johnson story here down the stretch, Lagway's emergence as the starter of this team, the resurrection of the Gators defense, right? All those things, not to mention Napier and his staff and the way they kind of were able to shield all from the nonsense and find a way. So I'm excited for them and a bowl game too. And I'm excited about the bowl game because I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of opt-outs for this group, just based on the age of the roster and where certain guys are on what they need to do perhaps to get to the next level. So I think they can have their first 4-game win streak under Billy Napier if they win their bowl game, which would be a pretty exciting way to end it. It's a long answer to your question, but that's the arc of the story, if you will.
That is basically the entire Gator football season encapsulated right there. So we'll see who they play in the bowl game. But let's switch gears to basketball. Todd Golden's group is off to a terrific start. They're 8-0. As of this recording, this will air on Friday. We're recording here on a Monday. So they could be 9-0 if they beat Virginia on Wednesday. Could be 8-1, hopefully 9-0. So what have you seen from Golden's group so far this year? Okay,
remember when I told you that I thought I saw one thing back in August and it turned out to be a little different than it was the right thing?
Yeah.
Look, with regard to basketball right now, this team is exactly what I thought they'd be during training camp. Wow. My eyes were opened quickly by Elijah Martin and the other impact transfers with this team. The two players in particular that I wanted to see take another step, and they did, Walter Clayton and Will Richard. I thought it was very important for them to go through the NBA draft evaluation process, which, having worked in the NBA and still do in a smaller way, that's a very frank conversation that comes along with that evaluation. You need to have some thick skin, because either they're going to tell you exactly where you are if you're ready to go to the next level, or they're going to be very honest with you about whether or not you can, and if you'd like to have a chance, you best do these things with your game. I thought Richard and Clayton both took those conversations to heart and then put them into practice. So they were improved and extra motivated coming into camp. And then Denzel Aberdeen decides to stay, and he adds depth in that backcourt. And so there's an edge to them. And Ethan, all they care about is winning. Mm-hmm. I've tried to interview several of them about different things, their family or where they grew up, or, just trying to get that side story, right? Yeah. Kind of build layers around these players and allow our fans to get to know them more. They don't really want to talk about it. They want to talk about winning and winning alone. And the way they've played on the floor has proven that their words are into action. So it's a great start for a team. They've been pushed on a couple of different occasions, but otherwise they've won all their games by double digits, which is crazy to think about. Wow. You mentioned the Virginia game coming up, and obviously when folks hear this conversation, they'll know whether or not the Gators won that ball game. It's at home, where they've won 11 of their last 12, if I'm not mistaken. No, they've won 11 or 12 in a row going into Wednesday, and something crazy like 17 of their last 18.
Sounds
so
right.
Home floor has been very kind to the Gators. So to have Virginia here is great, because I've been to Charlottesville. It's one of the best college basketball venues in the country. But Virginia's without Tony Bennett. So very interesting matchup for the Gators. And of course, all will know the result at the end of this conversation. But here's the deal. The caution here is this. The SEC is really, really good this year across the board. So get all the momentum you can now, because it won't be so easy come conference time in January.
Let's talk more about you, Sean. This is definitely one of your busiest times of the year. You're also working for ESPN while you're not being the voice of the Gators at the same time. So talk about just how busy this time of the year is for you, and take us behind the scenes of kind of your prep work and what goes on to make the broadcast as smooth as it goes.
Well, we still have the bowl game, but I'm really glad that the basketball-football overlap has hit pause here for a moment. Our visit had to wait to this week. I had 4 games last week, NBA, Gators basketball and football, and it's been that way for a couple of weeks now. But yeah, this is one of the busier times of year. The next one will come later on in the spring. But for me right now, I'm trying to, and I don't do so well with this sometimes, I'm trying to compartmentalize everything. So if this is the next game or the next show in front of me, I try to stay in that moment. But yet I also know that if I get some free time, I better kind of work ahead a little bit. The first area of this interview will find me at West Point, New York. I'll be working the American Athletic Conference Championship on Friday night. And so that's Army and Tulane. And yes, I was at Tulane 20-some years ago, but I have full-on prep for 2 teams that I haven't seen all year. The blessing here of being with the Gators is that one side of this I'm pretty up to speed on all the time.
Yeah.
And so that in itself is a helper. But it's busy, and football has its own rhythm, to answer your question about prep. And that's kind of a daily progression toward a game throughout that whole week. Basketball, because I've done so much of it, and I kind of have a formula and everything else, I can kind of get that done within 24 to 48 hours of the game itself. So again, if I can kind of just keep it right there in front of me and make sure that I can attend practice or be around coach as much as I can. The rest kind of will take care of itself.
Definitely. Now, let's go back even further in time to where you first started to fall in love with sports and sportscasting. You're a St. Louis guy. So many great broadcasters have come out of that area in over time. So who were some of the folks that you listened to growing up?
Yeah, no, I mean, everything's Cardinals there, right?
Oh, yeah.
But then there are other teams too. But if you just take the Cardinals, Jack Buck and Mike Shannon were the radio announcers of my youth, basically, of my coming up. But yet, Dan Kelley, who I think was the greatest hockey announcer ever, was the voice of the St. Louis Blues. And then the football team, which was in St. Louis until I think my junior year in high school before they broke my heart and left for Arizona. But, there are guys like Bill Wilkerson and even Bob Costas, who basically launched his career in St. Louis, were all influences upon me. And it was not just the way that they broadcast the games, it was also the way they interacted with their community, especially in the case of the Cardinals. Much like the Gators, the Cardinals is almost kind of like its own religion in St. Louis. So not only are those announcers the ambassadors of their team, but they're also ambassadors of that city. And so I'd kind of watch all this growing up. And like a lot of us, you always reach that point where you know that your sports playing days are going to come to an end at a competitive level.
Yeah.
And this was a way for me to stay in sports, but at the same time also kind of have a multi-dimensional aspect to my career. Community, the teams themselves, interaction with fans. And so those were the influences. And in a lot of ways, what I'm trying to do now here at Florida is me trying to get back to the original mold or the plan that I kind of concocted going into college about the St. Louis way, to maybe kind of do it here. Not that I'm trying to make this St. Louis, it's more about what my role will be.
Gotcha. Were there people growing up in St. Louis who were especially formative for you, like someone who helped build you up into the person and the broadcaster that you are today, be it family or someone in the professional sense?
No one really in particular. My mother was an avid baseball fan and radio listener. Like, the radio was always on in the house. And sometimes it was just kind of background noise, or sometimes it was elevated because she's dialed into the game. My father the same way, in that, allowed me to play a lot of different sports. I went to a small high school in St. Louis that had a requirement to play sports. And so, again, it allowed me to touch a lot of different things. I was never a really good football player, but I got to play, and so therefore I learned a lot of aspects about the game on a base level that served me later as a broadcaster. During the winter, I played a little hockey, and I played a lot more basketball, and then in the spring and summer, it was baseball. So certain individuals, yes, but certain circumstances maybe more than anything else. Again, I told you about kind of the atmosphere of the environment, but for me, though, the ability to participate in a lot of things allowed me to be a better broadcaster down the road.
Tell me about the first time you put on a headset.
Gosh. Well, to call a game, it was for Southern Illinois University women's basketball. And you engineer your own broadcast, you do your own prep, you do everything by yourself. Mm-hmm. And the equipment at the time was all phone line driven. And the equipment we had, you couldn't really talk to the studio per se back and forth like I can now. So we had like this equipment that I felt like, had come out of the Korean War. And it was as much work to figure out how to get on the air and in and out of breaks as it was to actually call the game itself. So in some ways it was probably terrifying, if I'm really being honest about it. But I had somebody with me that just put me at ease, and I had a basketball team at staff that was kind of excited to have me doing the games. And so I wasn't fighting anything else other than my own demons and this piece of equipment. So it kind of went from there, and then, you start to dabble in some high school sports and all that. And look, anyone who does those kind of assignments has the hardest job in this business. The higher you go, the more help you get. Mm-hmm. Like, now I have so much material available to me, I have to sort through it. Whereas, Ethan, as you know, you go to a high school football game and you're lucky to get a roster. And is the roster even correct?
Yep.
And you're stringing phone lines from the concession stand over the bleachers and everything else. So, It does get better.
Yes, it does.
It does. I promise you that. But that was kind of the entree into the play-by-play side. I had prepared myself, though, by doing a ton of other stuff in radio to where the on-air part was not so terrifying. And I thought that was good, too. I'm a firm believer in, they want you to do a weather forecast, do a weather forecast. Mm-hmm. Read the news, do the sportscast, run the board, learn what goes on at the other end. All those things kind of played into my development to finally be able to call games.
Was there a point where you realized, like, play-by-play is what I want, and I have the capability and the skill set to parlay that into a career?
Well, I think when I was late in high school, that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I made the mistake of going to college and saying, well, I should be a finance major.
Why?
I mean, because that's what's practical. And that lasted one semester.
Okay.
I figured out that was not going to go well. And just kind of like, okay, follow your heart on this. And quickly switched after semester number one. And all along, though, Ethan, I knew it was going to be play-by-play. I didn't get into broadcasting and say, let me just figure this out. We'll see what I'm good at or not. No. Everything was going to be geared toward doing play-by-play. I was willing to do anything, but the end game was going to be play-by-play. Bullheaded, yes. Did I gamble? I don't know. But that was the plan.
Right. Now, just to kind of bullet point, everything that came after Southern Illinois. I know you started out at a sports station, but you parlayed that into being the voice of the Green Wave and having a role with the New Orleans Hornets and later on the Pelicans as well.
Yeah.
So how did those experiences stack up and lead you to Gainesville?
Well, some of it's timing, right? Or location for that matter. First job out of college, I go to Columbia, Missouri, and did kind of like a bunch of everything and did just enough to where the rights holder at the time, which was Learfield ISP Sports, much different company than what it is now, had the opening at Tulane. And so moving to New Orleans was the big jump, if you will, to kind of be the guy. Or the bottom line is this: I was going to get to call football, basketball, and baseball. And so we moved, me and our young family, Kim and I moved down to New Orleans. And it just so happened to be the same year that the Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans, relocating that NBA franchise. The first year I'm in New Orleans, I'm so excited. Here I am working the job that I had set out to do, but yet it didn't pay very well. So my wife's working full time, and on my off days, I'm washing golf carts at the local country club. That's how the first year of my voice of whatever career begins. Thankfully, the Hornets, after that first year, had heard me doing the Tulane games. And they came to me and said, look, we know you want to do play-by-play, but on any night that you don't have Tulane responsibilities, would you come and be our studio host? Wow. Pre-game, halftime, post-game. And by the way, there could be some conflicts where maybe you'll get to do play-by-play of a game or two. No more washing golf carts. So that's, again, the timing of myself and that team moving to New Orleans, the kind of sticking through it that first year, and now here's this opportunity. So now I'm kind of in the door, right? And then sure enough, after a couple of years of doing that, they had made a change. And so they hired me away from Tulane full-time to be with the basketball team. Wow. So it's not like I submitted tape to an open audition. It wasn't, I was applying to an NBA team in some other market. I happened to move to the same market at the same time they did. They heard my work. I got in a small way. And then I just kind of inherited the job, or I was promoted into the job full time.
It's on a tee for you.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, look, you had to still do the work to get noticed and then produce when you got there.
Right.
Like you talk about being terrified about doing play-by-play. So I took that job, and the first week of that first season that I'm the studio host, I'm just the part-time studio host, sure enough, the first home Friday night, the TV guy had an assignment somewhere else, so they moved the radio guy to TV, and now I'm going to call play-by-play. It was Lakers at Hornets, and that was the team that had Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. It was the Fab Four team, and they're coming to town. It was the biggest home game of the year. And I was, you may be too young to remember, there was these old Memorex posters where the guy's sitting in a chair, and he's thrown back in the chair, and his hair's, straight back because he's blown away. And that's the way I felt for like the whole first quarter of this NBA game. The speed of the game, the power of the players, all that. That was terrifying. I somehow got through that. And maybe that's why I eventually got the job full time. I don't know, but that's how it led to that point. And then you ask about how I get to Gainesville, another didn't see it coming, right? So after a long run with the NBA team, I went to ESPN radio full time, was doing television and radio for ESPN, and I was actually negotiating my next contract when Mick Hubert retired. And I thought to myself, wow, this is fantastic. I don't really know Mick, but anybody can do that for 33 years and kind of call his own shot and do it his own way. That's hard to do in our business.
Sure.
So I was just like, way to go, Mick, and just didn't think much about it. And then I was approached, and then interest was gauged, and then the next thing you know, it got serious really quick. And then when ESPN said, if you take that job, instead of normally what ESPN would do would be kick rocks or get out of here, they said, would you stay in a smaller way if you take the Florida job? And at that point I thought, well, I'm an idiot if I don't do this.
That's really cool. You get the best of both worlds still.
Still, to this point.
That's awesome. So when you were taking the Florida job and you're stepping in for a legend in Mick Hubert, what kind of mentality did you have going into it?
Be myself, trust what I'd done. And I don't know, Ethan, if I could have taken this job 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago, because I don't know if I'd been ready in the sense of the follow the legend thing. I remember everybody told me, don't be the guy that follows the legend, be the guy that follows that guy.
Sure.
In this case, though, I felt like whether it be my age or what I'd done in my career, I felt like I could come and be myself, find my way in some sense, but already knew my style and how I would go about things. So again, timing is a funny thing. The timing of this seemed to be right. I'm not Mick Hubert. I got asked 1,000 times about, do you have a signature call or a signature phrase? Mick had "Oh my," obviously, and that's kind of not my style. And I just thought if I just get in there and be myself, it'll eventually take care of itself. There'll still be the Mick fans and the folks that don't like hearing anybody else other than Mick do these games, and I get that. I really, really do. I struggle with that listening as a Cardinals fan after all the years of having Jack Buck and Mike Shannon. That's no longer the case. But, John Rooney had to fill those shoes. Others have had to fill those shoes behind other legends. Look what Joe Davis has to go through following Vin Scully. I mean, it eventually comes to be, right? So I just think that I was in the best place I could be personally and career-wise to handle that kind of an assignment.
Here with Sean Kelley, voice of the Gators. So did you pursue any sort of advice from anybody? Because you talked about how St. Louis sports, that's a religion. Gator Nation, that's an entirely different religion. Did you seek out anybody?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm really lucky to work with the people that I do. Let's start with Steve Egan, who's been the engineer and producer of those broadcasts now dating back to the early 90s. I had him right away, and he was on Mick's crew. My football crew involved Shane Matthews and Tate Casey, representing two different eras of Gators athletics. And then Lee Humphrey with basketball, who won 2 national championships, and Jeff Cardozo, who not only played baseball here, but has been the voice of the baseball Gators for decades. I'm smart enough to know, lean on them. They'll kind of show me the way. And then I've let fans kind of show me the way too. If I leave myself open to their counsel and their stories, it'll start to generate some of that base that I need to be in this position. I'm smart enough to ask a lot of questions, and I'm smart enough to just lean on people who are smarter than me and better than me at what they've done in their careers. I have this great streak going that I try not to be the smartest guy in the booth. And over my career, I found a way to make sure that the other person I'm working with is smarter than me. And it's a good formula, Ethan. It's worked out pretty well.
Making the analyst shine, right?
Make the analyst shine, but also get out of their way more than anything else. Let them be the expert on what they are and not try to be something you're not.
Chomp that one up for the Gators. Where did it come from?
I don't know. And again, when I took the job, I thought people will hear some things that I kind of do. Maybe they're crutches, phrasings, different things that I'll do more often than not, but they were never really a signature thing. And the chomp this one up for the Gators just kind of started to organically make its way into.
I think it's great.
Well, I appreciate that because it still seems very young and very new, but I wanted something uniquely Florida to put a stamp on a Florida win in that sense. You've heard different broadcasters, painted orange and blue, or, Jack Buck's signature was "That's a winner," and that became a thing. And just like Chomp This One Up the Gators, I think he just started kind of saying it, and then the next thing you know, it's like what people remember most about, I say "So long for just a while" too. That's another old Jack Buck thing. So I did steal that one from him. It's more of an homage to him and what he meant to me early in my career. But this "Chomp This One Up for the Gators" is pretty new and organic. And thankfully right now we've been saying it more often than not. So we'll see if it sticks around.
Appreciate your time. I only have a couple more for you. This is year 3 for you in Gainesville. This has been a 30-plus year amazing career for you. Is this still the greatest job in the world?
It's fantastic. It really is. Like I said, it kind of takes me back to what my original vision about what I wanted this job to be, right? Don't get me wrong. Doing national broadcasts is outstanding. The best teams, the best venues, the big games. I mean, it's so rare that I do anything on the national level that the game doesn't have some kind of a high impact. And the players and coaches that I've gotten to cover, work with, call their games, all those things are fantastic. But there's something about getting back to what I originally wanted this job to be, which was be an ambassador of the university, the community, be with these teams on their journeys through the entire season, and be can I be a Jack Buck type figure for a fan base and community. And that's why this job is great for me personally. And then let's not forget there's the Gator brand and what UF means to so many people, not just in this state, but nationally and internationally. So I'm humbled in that sense to be in this spot. And it's pretty great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
My last question for you. You've been, a great mentor of mine, as well as my many broadcast students here at UF. You've taken a special interest in us, and I appreciate that. So what is your biggest piece of advice, not just to them, but to young broadcasters who are looking to make it to the level that you're at?
Yeah, and that's another great thing about this job, Ethan, is that I wanted to, at this point in my life and my career, I wanted to kind of start to get back to being able to maybe help do for folks what was done to me as far as bringing me along and whatnot. And I feel like I'm just, in the case of you and some of the others, I feel like it's just, I literally have put one foot in the door. And I knew it was going to take some time for me to get settled, get my family settled. But now I think that's something that I want to really see grow in a lot of ways. And it's not just the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of how to call a game or maybe even to prep for it. It's, in a lot of ways, how do you act in an arena? How do you make your way around a team and what they're going through? How do you build relationships, not just with players and coaches, but other broadcasters and whatnot? There's so many things that were shown to me early on that proved to be invaluable that I'll never be able to repay, and maybe I can start repaying that now. But to the one part of your question about what do I advise young people about, I think there's a couple things. One is, you have to find out who you are. Who am I as a genuine person and broadcaster? If you try to be something that you're not, it'll eventually trip you up and you'll fall. I mean, it may have an early bump for you. You may be able to sound a certain way or whatever, but eventually you're going to trip over it. So find out who you are and what your style is going to be. Learn to write well. I can't say that enough, because what we do as play-by-play broadcasters, or those who do sidelines, or news reporters who have to report live on scene, that's a lot of extemporaneous type speaking. And I think that if you learn to write well, you'll speak well. And so I think that as much writing as you can do will help you then speak well. And then last, but certainly not least, is try everything. Try everything. Don't say no to things, and that includes getting out of your comfort zone, whether that's the job itself or where you're going to do the job. I've watched too many try and skip steps, and sometimes that works. We've seen the overnight success story or whatever. I mean, Bob Costas used to say that everybody said that he was an overnight success. And he said, well, it was a 25-year experience. He goes, if you want to call that overnight success, be my guest. But it was 25 years for him to rise to be one of the greatest of his generation. So don't skip those steps. Don't say no along the way to an opportunity or some step that you think is not worthy of you or is a waste of your time. I promise you it will serve you in some way.
Wise words from the voice of the Gators, Sean Kelley. Thanks so much for the time.
Ethan, thank you for having me.
All right, that'll do it for us here on the Sports Lab.